Beautifully brilliant people, welcome back. Now let's continue this series of videos, shall we? When you begin your journey as a sophisticated investor in the midst of controlling financial instruments, in this case, that certificate we all know too well of, here are the list of entities you should look out for that are likely to be the better monetary option. I'm not saying here are the limitation of it. From my experience, here are the ones that are likely to be the better option. Because when markets crash, just so you know, let's sidetrack a bit. The whole purpose of central banking exists is so that they could bail out big banks. The everyday man never gets bailed out. Big banks are the ones that get bailed out. In other words, central banking system, whether it's the one at Europe, the one at Japan, or the one at North America, or for other parts of the world, and I've made a video listing the different types of central banks. Whatever those central banks are, know that in the realm of finance, they exist for the sole purpose of being insurance companies for big banks. Meaning if anything happens socioeconomically that they have triggered and created, because they control the ebbs and flow of things. Just like there's ups and downs to everything. When the wind blows hard, at some point it will slow down to the point where it practically doesn't feel like it exists. When the tide of the water comes into the shore, it gradually drifts back in. With the tide of the water, we know that the movement of the moon is the reason why. The moon are these big banks that pulls these tide of water. But we know the moon cannot exist and function the way it does without the activity of the sun. So ultimately, the inflow and outflow of the tide and the ebbs and flow, the rise and fall of that water, that tide, the sun really is the central bank when it comes to this financial circumstance. The water being currency, currency being monies, monies being in format in modern world based on money mechanic, this thing called instruments. Instruments are expressed in forms of certificates. What are one of those certificates many people know of? The birth certificates. So now I will repeat the way I began this video with that side note as a premise in your mind as to how these things work and why I am saying this. What I'm saying in this video is not something that I am compelling upon you to do. I'm simply giving you a recommendation from my experience. Up to you to do as thy wish. When you begin your journey as a sophisticated investor, here are the list of entities you should look out for that are likely to be better monetary option for your trust affairs, assuming you handle everything right. I use that phrase monetary option because I don't want the focus of this to be gullible in nature, but I assume you comprehend what I mean by that. Now, these entities are largely categorized into 4 sections. The first is investment banks. The second section is financial conglomerates. The third section is securities insurance company. The fourth section that work hand in hand with all those prior 3 are rating agencies. When it comes to investment banks, the ones that will likely create better monetary options is Goldman Sachs. The second is Morgan Stanley. The next is the rating company called Moody's. Another rating company is Standard & Poor's. Another rating company is Fitch Rating. A video was made in the past mentioning that each state has credit scores, and I show each state's credit scores. The one behind those credit scores for Wisconsin, for Missouri, for Pennsylvania, for Florida, all those states, Hawaii, are these rating companies right here. Because that certificate, remember, is based on the vital statistics of the county. The county subsequently rents it out to the federal and state. And they use it in their bookkeeping. And based on that, based on the population of people born and the equitable interest that people are constantly letting go of, they take it and make it theirs and add it to part of their bookkeeping to assist their rating. Therefore, it inevitably ties into the assets, bookkeeping, and the balance sheet, whether it's off balance sheet or not. And by the way, that's another thing. There's something called off balance sheet and there's a regular balance sheet. Regardless of whether it's on the off balance sheet or the regular balance sheet of the state and federal level, These investment banks, financial conglomerates, security insurance, and rating agencies play a huge part. Moody's, Standard & Poor, and Fitch Rating are rating companies. Goldman Sachs is an investment bank, and Morgan Stanley is also an investment bank. Other investment banks that would favor you are Merrill Lynch and Bear Stearns. Now, on the note of the third type of favorable monetary option that you have, particularly with securities insurance company. One of them is AIG, the second is MBIA, and the third is MBAC. Now, just so you know, on a side note also, AIG is the one that, aside from the Hartford Insurance Company, they're the second largest bond holders for municipalities also. This is another reason why when you have your stuff together, these municipalities are likely to settle with you once they see you have certain things in line, because you have direct hand and access to their securities also when they trespass upon yours, because you have the same power and functioning on potentially a higher level if you are intricate with it. Moving on. From my experience, these entities are well experienced with how to work with private persons being the express trust and their members. In fact, these list of entities that I've just shown are the backbone behind bailing out of banks internationally and have direct strings with IMF, International Monetary Fund, and other central banks. They love when private investors have value they can use and are more than willing to give a small piece of the pie. To them, it is small and insignificant. To the everyday man, it is quite noticeable. I'll say that and leave that one be in order to not deter the focus of competency and awareness of the playing field. The next important thing is the intent and working of securitization. Do you know what securitization really means? If you don't, then you should. This is because these entities just mentioned or other entities simply focus on this thing called securitization. Remember the video done on valuation? This video. Valuation and securitization, they walk behind and in front of one another. If securitization is not leading, then valuation is. But nonetheless, securitization in simplicity, in its simplest format, we can read all these complicated black and white. We can talk all the sophisticated shit all we want. But if you cannot see it in your mind in the most simplest format, whenever people start speaking to you, whenever you start reading things, you cannot transliterate it into the everyday man's language. All these things we're saying, all these lingos are foreign languages. They're financial terms, so much that they are financial dictionaries for these things. So in simplicity from experience, or if you were to refresh your mind, or if you were to actually teach your children these things, or your trust members, what securitization is in simplicity. Securitization is what makes all these other parties that I've just mentioned, those investment banks, financial conglomerates, security insurance companies, and rating agencies, securitization is what makes them money before they give you your cash flow or dividend. And there has to be a trail of document through the private placement that says that you can lease it out. And the act of you leasing it out allows them, it being that certificate that we all know of, so we don't have to constantly mention it. So when I say it, I assume you know I'm referring to that instrument called the birth certificate. That allows you to lease it out. The PPM allows you to lease it out. And that is what allows them to securitize it, to make monies, and subsequently give it a cash flow. I know many people who go through certain series of studies, hear people say, that thing is not yours. You can't lay claim to it. It's not yours. It's theirs. You sure it is? It is theirs because they created it. But guess what they did? They attached it to you and your equitable interest. What you are doing is not saying you own it. What you are doing is a certain equitable interest and giving unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. See, when a lot of people hear that phrase, give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, they don't know what that constitutes. They think it's just, I don't belong to this. You can't do this to me. This doesn't apply to me. But simultaneously, what they're functionally doing is saying, yes, this applies to me. People are confused. When you hear that phrase, give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, is what I've just explained thus far. Whereby a certain nature of contract called a private placement memorandum, in short PPM, is presented so that they do their thing, which is called securitization. You give unto them what is theirs because they want it. That's the reason why they went as far as to create a system whereby before you were aware of anything, while your mother was tied after the birth, they compel her to sign something or else they cannot take that child out of the hospital. And that triggers the whole series of fuckery with the birth certificate and the renting of it that a lot of people speculate about all over the internet. Excuse my harsh language, but with things of this nature, it is that serious that we have to communicate with each other on the most basic level before we start speaking about sophisticated stuff. Because many people come into this thing with a very wrong state of mind. They've been, for the lack of a better term, mind fucked with so many different processes, with so many different things. So much that even they start to do what's contrary to what they assert or assume that they're doing properly. And those who know just sit back and go, are you serious? Do you really see what's going on? We've mentioned and clarified this in so many different ways in so many different videos. But here's just a summary of it. You give unto Caesar what is Caesar through something called a private placement memorandum. But here's just a summary of it. You give unto Caesar what is Caesar through something called a private placement memorandum. But here's just a summary of it. You give unto Caesar what is Caesar through something called a private placement memorandum. But here's just a summary of it. You give unto Caesar what is Caesar through something called a private placement memorandum. But here's just a summary of it. You give unto Caesar what is Caesar through something called a private placement memorandum. If there's any core or epitome of what the purpose of that PPM is, it is just that. But in the process of that, you're not just a slave, which is the process of them turning you into a debtor, aka the borrower. And then they take your signature and do things behind your back without your consent, or you benefited from it. Wash away that state of mind previously and have a new one. Otherwise, you will never comprehend what's being explained here. Now, with that said, let's continue. Securitization is what makes those entities money before they give you cash flow or dividend. This is the basic summary of how securitization works, without going into all the sophisticated formalities, albeit the sophisticated formalities are necessary because that's the language that people will speak in that world. Especially if you're a newbie, which most people listening to this are. They don't care enough to speak to you in regular terms. They don't have any relationship with you. They don't need your money. So they're not obligated to speak to you a certain way. It's really just that simple. It's human nature. I know it's messed up. But at the end of the day, those you're dealing with relating to these are flesh and blood just like you. They have impulse. And the world they live in, they move like that. So that's the basic summary of what securitization is. Once more, I'll repeat in case it wasn't clear. The simplicity of securitization is simply the process of private contract being presented to give unto Caesar what is Caesar. That way you can get the equivalent equitable interest that is yours. The principle of correspondence, the principle of giving before you get. When I tell you that these people operate on nature's law, I truly mean it. Many people going on about spirituality, this spirituality, that. They somehow rend the essence of finance and modern money mechanics and the way modern wealth works from spirituality, assuming that it's different. When you start to see the formality of all these things, all these financial terms, and you put it in simplicity and operation and you go through it over the years, you realize, oh my goodness, all these things are spiritual things placed on pen and paper in a sophisticated manner so that the everyday man remains lost in the sauce. It's that simple. I'm sure you've done it somewhere along your path in life also. You saw something simple that you don't want other people to know. Maybe it's your sibling. Maybe it's in the playground while you were at grade school. You made it so complex so other people think it's special. You got that new shoe, that simple that your parents just bought for you somewhere, and you didn't even put any money out there, but you're going out there walking around with it looking cool. Everyone, oh my God, he did something special. When in truth, it's as simple as going up there, giving an equivalent exchange. For you to have that cool shoe that all the other children in school are saying, oh my God, that looks cool. Someone had to give something to get it. That is what all these people are speaking of when they say give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. When it comes to the birth certificates, the explanation and the details of it, whether or not they themselves know it, whether or not at that moment they're just pulling something from the ethers, which is valid, but without clarity and the sophistication and firsthand experience. But because they don't have clarity and sophistication of firsthand experience, when they throw those words at the listener, which feels that, man, there's something to what this man or woman is saying, they don't get the pragmatic portion of it. The simplicity of securitization is given unto Caesar what is Caesar through a private contract called private placement memorandum. And in turn, these entities mentioned earlier at the beginning of this video, they make money from that. They give you cash flow or dividend. Simple as that. This is the basic summary of how securitization works. It will be explained from twofold angles, just so you can get a better comprehension of it. The first angle is from the typical manner of commerce, which is the basic interaction between the everyday man. And the second fold is how the same basic manner is used by entities all over the world when it comes to pen and paper. Here's the first fold. We'll use the simplicity of stick figures. Just to elaborate this for the different types of learners. Some people are excellent in auditory learning. Some people require some visual. So let's go back to basics. Yes, stick figures. There's lender and there's borrower. Here's the first fold of example of how securitization is functionally in everyday man's life. Bob, the borrower, is to the right. Goes to Larry, the lender, which is to the left, and says, hey, Larry, the lender, give me $100 and I'll give you $10 each month until that $100 is satisfied. So Larry agrees. Simple enough, right? It is. The second fold is now this, which is the sophisticated portion of that simplicity. Larry, the lender, sells that same promise to pay, signed by Bob, the borrower, to Dick, the investment bank. Remember those investment banks I mentioned? Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, Bear Stearns? Right. Larry, the lender, takes that note that Bob, the borrower, signed and then sells it to Dick, the investment bank. Dick, the investment bank, is precisely how he sounds. He invests in debts and contracts signed by others by compensating people like Larry, the lender, to assign partial interest of their money they are lending to a bunch of Bob, the borrowers. AKA Dick, the investment bank, becomes the holder in due course of that note that a lot of Bob, the borrowers, have given Larry, the lender. And when I say Bob, I'm simultaneously referring to both genders and entities. When I say Larry, the lender, I'm simultaneously referring to both genders, male and female, and entities. When I say Dick, it's not just based on male, it's based on male and female and entities. So look at this from a huge scope, because the activity of humans on earth involves man, woman, and the entities they use as a medium or as a vehicle in commerce. It's the reality. So Dick, the investment bank, invests in debts and contracts signed by others by compensating Larry, the lender, to assign partial interest of their money they are lending to a bunch of Bob, the borrowers, so that Dick, the investment bank, can use the notes, since Bob, the borrower, lacks the knowledge of the value of the note anyway. To Bob, the borrower, that thing he signed is just a piece of paper and, that's it. But to Dick and Larry, that piece of paper, oh, that's money. That's something. There's more to it. Now, Dick, the investment bank, takes about 10,000 more similar promises to pay by Bob, the borrowers, and makes a product of it for himself. These different promises to pay by many clueless Bob the borrowers are car loans, student loans, commercial mortgages, residential mortgages, corporate buyout debts, credit card loans. Think of it. Dick, the investment bank, is gathering it from left and right, front and back, up and down, sideways and all angles from a lot of Larry the lenders. Why? Because a lot of Bob the borrowers are just signing their life away. One cursive, one signature, one print, one internet click at a time. Even if they were denied, even if they defaulted, it doesn't concern Dick, because his job is to simply take those notes, put it together, and then create a product from those notes. This reality actually exists. When different types of debts are bundled and placed into one box as one product by Dick the Investment Bank. Remember, products are something you sell and buy. So when these varying types of debts that have been mentioned are made into one product, these different types of debts, student loan, car debt, car loans, buyout debt, credit card loans, so and so, when they are taken and made into one product, they are called CDOs, collateralized debt obligation. But that which puts value to these debt obligations, called different types of promissory note, now bundled as CDOs, is something called the Social Security number. We read in this video that the Social Security number is a funding instrument. It's a credit instrument. And in Tier 4, 5th, and 4th video, we mentioned the fact that that is an instrument that's usually a form of trade secret because it bears value, monetary value. And so if you're not on Tier 4 to see the explanation of how these things are trade secret, you're really going into a firearm fight with a knife or a bare knuckle. This Social Security number that a lot of people go on about is itself a derivative. I repeat, the Social Security number in itself is a derivative. And this Social Security number is what actually allows Dick, that derivative itself, because the Social Security number is attached to all these loans. It's the reason why Dick, the investment bank, is able to even bundle these notes in the first instance. In its truest and rawest form, which is the birth certificate, Dick can't do anything to it. Dick, the investment bank, first has to convert that birth certificate into a derivative through a different trust, aka an agency of the United States called the Social Security Administration, into a derivative called Social Security number, so that he could turn anything that Bob the borrower, who has that derivative and attaches to those notes that they sign, so that he can then take those notes and the derivative which brings those notes to life by way of consent of Bob the borrower's autograph, and then turn it into a product. If Social Security number was never involved in these types of promise to pay by all these Larry the lenders, then Dick the investment bank would simply just have a bunch of papers and numbers sitting in front of him, worthless, useless. But the derivative called the Social Security number attached to these notes is what gives value to it. It being those notes and everything else Bob the borrower will sign. The Larry the lender subsequently hands to Dick the investment banker for a fee, so that Dick the investment banker becomes the holder in due course, as we went over in this video. The Social Security number has an origin where it branches from that which is called the birth certificate. Are you seeing the equation of how this system of yours at North America and everyone else that they've colonized work? Because that's an advantage to you. If you are in the belly of the beast, they call North America the belly of the beast because they've colonized a lot of people. And if you can survive this system, which many people are just doing, that's not enough. Merely surviving the belly of the beast is not enough. That's what you see out here with people casually going to work every day, thinking they're doing something special, getting degrees. They are living in survival mode and they don't realize it. They have student loans that they will never finish paying until they're in their 60s or 70s. Retirement age. They are getting into mortgages because they think, oh, well, I have this master's degree. I'm getting paid 70, 80, 90, 100K a year. That means my expense must also go up because I must show the world and, my next door neighbor that because I have a degree, I must have a great car with a great loan and a shelter with a huge amount of ridiculous mortgage on it. So now they just keep accumulating bad debt. And guess what? Larry the lender rubs his hand like DJ Khaled and goes, another one. Happy. And then hands it to Dick the investment banks, who grins and say, good job. Just keep bringing me more. Just keep creating the Rockefeller education system for them to get that sense of entitlement. It's on a piece of paper and just keep indoctrinating them into a system that keeps making them money and turning them into a consumer. Excellent. And that's just the basic stuff. Not even the intricate things we're speaking of here. Even the people who say they know the intricate things we're speaking of here fully don't get it. They just run around in a circle and makes the competent one looks bad. This is one of the reasons why I make these videos, this channel, so that people can get the substance of things beyond all these instant gratification going on in the internet. Most of the people saying they're dealing with these special information are still suffering in survival mode. Some of these people are homeless. Some of these people are living paychecks to paycheck. Yet they're saying they're dealing with these special information. For this special information to work for you, you have to know some basic information about business and trust. They don't know it. They just throw those buzzwords around. That's the reason why I'm making all these videos on trust, business, contract, UCC, to give you the foundation. Honestly speaking, it takes about 6 years for those foundations to be learned before we even begin talking about these things. But I'm not going to wait that long. I'll just put all these out there, and the least anyone can't say is these things weren't shown and explained to them. Anyway, the Social Security number, a derivative, has its origin where it branches out from something called a birth certificate. Are you seeing the equation in this system of yours? I refer to this system as a possession of yours because without you, it will not exist, nor will it ever work. Because you always have equitable interest. And so long as the one with the equitable interest consents, whether knowingly or not, but the one holding interest in the forefront as legal owners of that ins legis, the creature of law, would always benefit. The key and secret is to keep you from seeing how you contribute to its work, and while people sit behind the desk casually and daily waiting for you to hand it to them. And once the door closes, you cease to know what else happens. They take something from you by force, give it back to you, sit there and condition you from arm's length, called a system. System is a clockwork of different wheels moving together. And there's a rope attached to those wheels and clockworks attached to you and your mind, which snaps you back like a boomerang to give what they snatched from you and gave to you back to them. That's a cold system. You have to give credit when it's due. As much as many people want to hate all these so-called bad guys in society, they're smart because obviously they're able to control billions of people. This simplicity that I've just explained. Again, the key and secret is to keep you from seeing how you contribute to its working while people sit behind desks casually and daily waiting for you to hand it to them. And once the door closes, you cease to know what else happens behind closed doors. What you are doing is to take it further. Complete 1 hour videos posted on the Patreon page. Take care. Best of luck.